Good afternoon, everyone, once again. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today. My name is Kimberly Fowler, and I'm the Technical Assistance and Research Center Director here at the National Council of Urban Indian Health. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, which is entitled Tribal Resource Tool for American Indian and Alaska Native Victims and Survivors of Crime and Violence. The National Council of Urban Indian Health is a membership-based nonprofit that represents the 41 urban Indian health organizations across the nation that provide essential health and social services to American Indians and Alaska Natives living in urban settings. If you have not already done so, please feel free to type your name and organization in the chat box located in the lower left-hand side of your screen. All of the lines are currently muted. And if you wish to ask a question, please feel free to place them in the Q&A box that's located at the lower part of your screen. There will be a time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. So as I mentioned, today's webinar is being presented to you by Gail Tom, who will be speaking to us today about the Tribal Resource Tool that has been implemented. She serves as the project director for the Tribal Resource Tool at the National Center for Victims of Crime. Gail is also a 28-year veteran of the criminal justice field. She actually retired from the FBI during her 10th year as a victim specialist who served on the nationwide FBI Rapid Deployment and Evidence Response teams, primarily responding to violent crimes, abuses, and trauma. In an agency-wide vote, Tom was one of 6 Bureau personnel nationwide tapped for the FBI American Indian and Alaska Native Advisory Committee. For the past 4 years, she has shared from her education and experiences by providing training and technical assistance to Alaskan villages and Native American tribes. This includes many Departments of Justice grantees. We are so excited for Gail to join us today. But before we get started, I'd just like to once again remind everyone that you are in a listen-only mode, meaning that your lines are muted. So if you wish to ask a question, feel free to place them into the Q&A box located in the lower portion of the screen so that they can be answered at the end of the presentation. Please also note that the presentation slides and handouts are available for download in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. You can download these at any time throughout the presentation or at the end of the webinar. So I will now turn it over to today's presenter, Gail Tom. Gail, you have the floor.
Thank you, Kimberly. I appreciate that gracious invitation to be here today and share our Tribal Resource Tool with everyone. We are very excited to have it implemented and available online now, and we're going to be asking you, our attendees, for your assistance in getting your programs entered into the tool so that they're available when victims and survivors are searching for assistance. I always like to say that there are no experts, that there are only people who have tried to do their best and are willing to share what they've learned when we speak up and present trainings or webinars. I am honored to be with the National Center for Victims of Crime, as Kimberly said, as the project manager for the Tribal Resource Tool. And I come with the experience of having provided direct services in tribal communities for over 10 years, primarily Pine Ridge and Rosebud, Cheyenne River, Crow Creek, Lower Brule, Standing Rock, and other communities. We responded to crime scenes. That was my primary duty as a victim specialist for FBI, to respond to the crime scene and assist the victim from that point on to the prosecution and often through the prosecution of a crime. Because of the national teams that Kimberly mentioned that I was a part of, I was honored to respond to the Red Lake Nation school shooting. We may have those from Minnesota on our webinar with us today. And I also responded to Ground Zero after the 9/11 terrorist attacks and worked 2 different assignments there. I worked after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, but probably one of the most important things that I was privileged to be a part of in my FBI victim assistance career was implementing the Child Advocacy Center for the Rosebud Sioux Tribe. It went on to now serve at least 3 different tribes in that area of South Dakota. At the same time that we started the Child Advocacy Center, we also developed the SART team, the Sexual Assault Response Team. And prior to that, I worked criminal intelligence for 12 years and methamphetamine enforcement for 3 years. Meth is still kind of knocking our socks off in our tribal communities, unfortunately. I don't know if any of our webinar attendees want to admit that they've been to the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally in South Dakota, that annual event. I've worked 16 of those in different capacities. And that's probably more than you want to know about me, but hopefully that's enough to tell you why you should stay awake for the next several minutes as we talk about the Tribal Resource Tool. What we want to do is promote this web-based resource mapping tool. It's a searchable database of crime victim services. The mapping tool is now available to you on the website. Yet our project team is still working to collect information about service providers to further populate it. We're going to talk about the background of this project briefly, take a brief look at it, talk about populating the tool. That's such an important part of our time today, is talking about getting all of the programs that provide services for Native American and Alaskan victims and survivors of crime, getting your information into the database so it's available whenever those victims and survivors are searching for help. We're going to talk about what's on the horizon for the tool, the data analysis that we're going to be doing, and how you can get involved with the Tribal Resource Tool to make it as effective as possible. And there will be a time for questions and answers at the end, or you can type them in at any point and we will address them at the end. Right now, I'd like for you to put yourself in the position that you're treating an adult female domestic violence victim, and she wishes to locate back to her home state of South Dakota. She's an enrolled member of the Rosebud Sioux Tribe there. The victim is currently living and receiving support in your area, and you would like to help her by finding referrals for culturally competent services, which would include traditional healing, safety planning, and general support for when she returns to her home state. How are you going to do that? Think about that for just a moment. I have the solution for you, the answer. It's the Tribal Resource Tool, and you can find it at tribalresourcetool.org. And it is the project that we're going to spend the next several minutes focusing on. It's an Office for Victims of Crime project from the Vision 21 funds, and OVC is greatly committed to keeping the information accurate and current, and getting it fully populated with all of the programs nationwide that do serve Alaskan Natives and American Indians. OVC is committed to the long-term sustainability of this project. It's something that they intend to keep current and to always have it there for victims and survivors when they're searching for assistance. The project is a collaboration. We have the NCVC has 2 partners that have worked hard and diligently on developing the Tribal Resource Tool. One of them is the Tribal Law and Policy Institute. Many of you as attendees probably know Bonnie Claremont or Corey Cordero from TLPI. The National Congress of American Indians is our other partner, And you may know Kelby Kennedy or Gwen Evans Lomiesta, and they have also worked diligently on the project. OVC, the U.S. Department of Justice, funded the Tribal Resource Tool project team to create this web-based resource mapping tool, and they gave us two primary goals. The first one, of course, is to link American Indian and Alaskan Native victims and survivors of crime and abuse to services anywhere in the country, on tribal lands or off tribal lands. That's why it's so key for us to get to talk to you through the National Council of Urban Indian Health, because the urban service providers are key to the tool being effective, and we really want to get your programs into the database. OVC also tasked us with helping identify gaps in the network of existing services. So it's important that we get all of the existing services entered into the tool so that we can accurately identify where there are gaps in services. The tool will include services for all ages of American Indian, Alaskan Native victims and survivors, for all forms of victimization, for all locations on or off tribal lands in areas that are remote, rural, urban, or suburban, and for all needs of victims, which might include justice, safety, healing, and support. We did extensive research before developing the tool and received a lot of input from our tribal key stakeholders. And some of the things that were emphasized to us repeatedly from the tribal stakeholders and from the meetings that we held is that American Indian and Alaskan Native survivors need access to services throughout their lifespan at all ages. And they encouraged us to ensure that the tool is user-friendly and safe for victims and service providers. We had worked on that and had the escape button, and if you have additional suggestions for us in that way, please let me know that. Our stakeholders also encouraged us to ensure that the tool is accessible to those living in remote locations or living with disabilities. And for some things, they emphasize that a referral source rather than a direct link to a service may be preferred. And that's exactly what the Tribal Resource Tool is, an excellent referral source. They also encouraged us to remember that it's important to work with the local tribal coalitions, the victim service coalitions, to gather information on the existing services and to create an efficient system for keeping the tool updated. And OVC is very interested in ensuring that that is done. Some of the key stakeholders, we have over 100 that had input into the formation of the Tribal Resource Tool, and some of their logos are shown here. You will recognize different ones of them. I'll leave that up for just a moment. For the development of the Tribal Resource Tool, we used input gathered from focus groups, from web meetings, from in-person meetings, and many one-on-one calls to develop the provider service survey questions and the data collection fields. We used that input to develop the program inclusion criteria and the guidelines, and also the appearance of the official website. My voice is a little hoarse today, so I apologize for that. And we're going to just take a real brief look at the Tribal Resource Tool now. Kimberly's going to bring it up for us. It always takes a little longer whenever we're waiting on it, doesn't it? whenever you bring your screen up, you will go to the home screen that looks like this. And then when you go to the bottom of that first home screen, there is a box. I'm going to go up just a little bit farther. And that's where you include your program into the Tribal Resource Tool. You click on this box. We won't do that right now, but that's the box that you click on, and it will bring up the form where you can enter your program's information into the mapping tool. And it will probably take you 10 to 15 minutes. That seems to be about the time that it takes most people to enter their program. And then if you want to search, you come over to Map. And it will bring up the map. And I apologize, I'm not very smooth at this. And while I have this down here, I'll show you whenever you do a search, it not only pops the programs up on the map, but it also gives you a list down below that's printable if you want to print it out. And it gives you the name of the program and a little bit of information about them. And if you click on that program, then it will bring up more details, and you can see the answer to several of your questions. This one happens to be SCAR, Society of Citizens Against Romance Scams, which is an interesting one. But if any program that you click on, it will give you details about the provider, such as their hours of operation, their website, the contact phone number, the ages of the victims that they serve, and so forth, the gender served. This one happens to serve female, male, transgender, and gender non-binary. It gives you the crime type served. So for our example that I gave you earlier about the victim from South Dakota that's in your area and wants to relocate to South Dakota, you can check this list and see if the program offers domestic violence response services and safety planning that particular victim had asked for. She also asked for culturally relevant services, and over here under additional information, you can go down and find out if this service is tribally affiliated. If not, they offer services to all victims, not just American Indian and Alaskan Native. You can go on down and find the answer to additional questions, whether they're a member of a state coalition, whether or not they offer organized traditional healing services, and so forth. There's a lot of information that you will enter about your program so that it can populate this database. Then there's a map at the bottom that gives you directions to where the program is located, if that's helpful. And we'll go back up and go back out to the map. And you have search functions on the side. I'm going to enter, as an example, let's look at Oklahoma. Being slow. And the number of programs that are available in a certain area will pop up, and then you can click on the marker, and it will give you additional information on that particular program, as I mentioned. And then you have your list at the bottom that also you can click on for more information about that particular program. And there are other search functions that are available too, such as type of crime and so forth. And I'll have you go back to the slides now, Kimberly, if you would, please. Thank you for your assistance with that. You probably won't be surprised to know that right now the primary service that is available, the most submissions so far for programs is for domestic violence, and then sexual assault is the second most that we have in the database. So let's talk about ways to use the tool in practice, ways that you can apply this. You can share the website with existing patients for future reference. We have included a handout for you that you can print out that's got the website on it. You can use the tool with a victim or survivor so that they feel comfortable conducting their own searches for themselves or others. You can provide information to members of the community before a crime occurs at outreach events. I have provided since several palm cards and other pieces of information to individuals recently that are doing presentations for their tribal councils and any other public meetings. We would encourage you, when it's appropriate, to share this information to really get the word out about the Tribal Resource Mapping tool. You can share and train your local law enforcement on the Tribal Resource tool so that they will educate their victims that they're responding to know that there are options available after a crime occurs. We encourage you to reach out to agencies to create and expand coalitions and mutual referral protocols. Use the Tribal Resource Mapping tool as a gaps analysis in your area. Check it out and find out what agencies are in there from your area and encourage others. We're in a very preliminary stage of getting programs entered into the tool. And that's why we very much appreciate this opportunity to talk about it today, and we'll appreciate your help in getting as many programs entered as possible. And then always you're welcome to provide a link to the tool on your website if you would do that. I'm going to go back up to doing the gaps analysis of area agencies. We're often asked, one of the questions that comes up frequently is, for a tribe, do they just enter the name of the tribe, or do they need to enter each program individually? And we really encourage that each program be entered. As I said, it takes about 10 to 15 minutes to enter a program, to answer the questions and enter it. And so if a tribe has housing services, if they have a victim assistance program, if they have a SART team, there are so many different programs within a tribe that could be very helpful to a victim, and we encourage each of those to be entered individually. One example, we got to launch the tool recently at the Indian Nations Conference, and a tribal victim service provider that works the Los Angeles area said, she told us that she carries 2 large binders around with her, and those are full of the resources, the referrals that she has available to use with the victims and survivors that she serves. And she said trying to keep them updated is an unending challenge. And so once our tribal resource tool is fully populated, she can replace those 2 outdated large binders with her smartphone or with her laptop to be able to search the tribal resource tool for her referral sources. For our outreach to populate the tool, our team has attended at least 25 national conferences and several regional trainings. We've circulated email blasts to over 14,000 contacts, and that's a very conservative number. Some of you I know have emailed me and said, okay, this is the 3rd time I've received this. So hopefully they entered their program during some of those email contacts. Our stakeholders have promoted the inclusion form by social media, and we'll be doing more social media outreach. We've conducted outreach calls directly to service providers to get their programs entered. And if you are aware of future events that we should try to attend to publicize the Tribal Resource Tool, we appreciate you telling me about those in the question and answer session. We're also hoping that you will be willing to promote the tool and publicize it. That will be very helpful. We've divided the country into different regions. Right now, the Oklahoma region has the most programs submitted into the tool. Let's see, the Pacific region is second, and then the Great Plains region. But we are focusing on each of these individually because each one of our different regions have programs that need to be submitted into the Tribal Resource Tool. So what's on the horizon for us? We are constantly upgrading the application, or upgrading, the website and the mapping tool. We've recently made several improvements to it. We're looking at possibly developing an app, and we'll talk more about that. The gaps analysis, as I mentioned earlier, is one of the two main goals of our project. And we've also been asked to make recommendations to OVC about sustaining the tool and maintaining its accuracy, because they do intend for this to be a very long-term project. We're also really excited about bringing on a new project partner, Strong Hearts Native Helpline, and we will be bringing them on shortly, and they will help us work on populating the Tribal Resource Tool. So I mentioned that we're looking at doing an app. Considering that, we've had we think that there are some definite pros to doing that, but we've also had some things presented to us that could be a con to that. So a question for you to consider: should there be an app version of the Tribal Resource Tool? The safety consideration is one of the things that has been brought to our attention on that. Let's talk about the gaps analysis just briefly. National Congress of American Indians, this is their portion of the partnership, and they have two goals: to identify all the resources available to American Indian and Alaskan Native crime victims and survivors, and then the other is to assess the gaps that need to be filled. So it's important that we get the tool fully populated so that they can accurately assess the gaps that need to be filled. And NCAI will be developing this data analysis throughout this year. They've already done some preliminary work, and there's much more. And I think it's going to be very interesting to us to see the remainder of that. We do have a poll question that I want to ask for you. And actually, there are two poll questions that we want to ask. One of them is, as a service provider, Kimberly, is that the one that's on the screen? I apologize.
Yeah, both polls are up. The service provider poll is up and on the far left of the screen. Right there.
Perfect.
And
all right.
That's a simple yes/no question that asks, as a service provider to American Indian or Alaskan Native victims of crime and abuse, is your program or organization entered into the Tribal Resource? So for people in the audience, that's a simple yes or no question for us to get an assessment of how many people are participating in the tool who are in the audience. So by simply a yes or no vote, you can indicate your participation. So you might take a few seconds to look at our first poll.
I'm hoping that you've heard some information that will encourage you to go ahead and get your program entered into the Tribal Resource Tool.
The second poll question asks about a multiple choice question that asks the following alternatives: which of the following will be most helpful to learn about regarding the tribal resource tool in any future trainings or webinars? So which of the following will be the most helpful thing to learn about the tribal resource tool? And you see your options there. Entering your program into the tool, using the tool from a service provider's perspective, this investigation of gaps analysis as a focus for the tool, using the tool from a victim survivor's perspective, or an other. And in the instance of the other, you could enter that answer into the Q&A box if you have an opportunity to list a specific item that you think should be listed under other. So take a couple of seconds to look at our options there. And we'll leave that screen up for you. So I think that concludes the amount of time for the poll. And again, thank you for your participation. I'm going to return the screen to our presentation.
I find that very interesting, the results, so we will have to make sure and get you more information. You can help us. You can complete the provider inclusion form today, as I showed you on the website. You can promote the tribal resource tool in the different ways that we talked about. Also at trainings, webinars, if you do a newsletter on your social media site, share our website. We would appreciate you doing that. It's an important tool. It can make a huge difference in victims and survivors rebuilding their lives, and its availability and publicizing services for them anywhere. Alaskan Native and American Indian victims and survivors deserve to have resources available to them, and this tool will be an excellent way to provide that. I so appreciate you all spending your time with us this morning. There are many different things that compete for our time these days, and for you to spend your time learning about this resource is very important. We'd like to entertain some questions now. If you'd use the chat box, the Q&A box on your screen. As I mentioned earlier, we're in the preliminary stages of getting the tool populated, so it's important that we enlist your help in spreading the word and getting other programs to enter their information as well. As I said, it probably takes 10 to 15 minutes to complete the form. You may do it faster. You may set a record and be able to do it faster. I mentioned the handouts earlier that are available. We would appreciate you downloading those, printing them, and sharing that information as is appropriate. We talked about which states currently have the most programs entered into the tribal resource tool. Oklahoma has the most currently, California, and then South Dakota. But we need to get programs from all over the country entered. And you all aren't going to try to stump me with any hard questions, are you?
I have a question, Gail.
All
This
right.
is Kimberly. First of all, thank you so much for your time today and providing this information to all of us. Many thanks to you. I was just wondering if there's any deadline for inclusion on the tribal resource tool when it comes to the service providers. I know you said that you're in the infancy of putting the information onto the website, but is there any stopping point or deadline that we need to be mindful of?
There is no deadline, but we would really encourage everyone to enter their information as quickly as possible. And we're going to really be doubling down on recruiting programs and helping them get their information entered in the near future. And again, if our listeners, if our attendees have any conferences or trainings that would be helpful for us to promote the Tribal Resource Tool app, please let us know. My contact information is on the screen, Gail Tome, and there's my email address and my phone number. And I would really appreciate if you have any thoughts at any time about the Tribal Resource Tool, please reach out to me. There are also other contacts there from our partner organizations. And again, we are very appreciative of the time to let you know about the Tribal Resource Tool today and to our host of the webinar.
Absolutely. We thank you also. Once again, the presentation slides and handouts are there for you to download at any point in time. We do ask for you to take a few moments to provide us feedback on today's webinar through our SurveyMonkey link that is actually in the chat pod at this time. You'll also be redirected to that page once we close out of the webinar. But we do take that information to heart and try to make sure that we are making quality improvement changes within our webinar practices, as well as providing feedback to the presenters. We had a wonderful conversation with Gail today on the Tribal Resource Tool, and we hope that you all gained some information that you can take back to your own organization and utilizing it. Feel free to reach out to her. Feel free to reach out to Nikumi. Our information is listed here. Myself, Mark, and Sabu are readily available for any of your technical assistance needs as well. And I don't see any questions coming through, which means that you did an excellent job in presenting, and everyone was readily, easy to digest the information. It might need a little bit more time, so they might be reaching out later on. But once again, Gail, we do thank you for the presentation. And I wish that everyone has an excellent rest of their day. Thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you on a future webinar. Thank you.